Hello and welcome to Decoded. In this episode, we'll be talking about one of the most significant pieces of legislation to emerge from Westminster in recent years, the Cyber Resilience Bill. We'll explore what the bill proposes, why it matters, and how it could reshape how essential services, suppliers, and digital infrastructure defends against cyber attacks. To help unpack this, I'm joined by Alison Bayliss, cybersecurity and privacy expert here at Aristi. So let's get stuck in. Hi Alison, welcome to another episode of Decoded.
Hello, good to be here again.
So let's start with the basics, Alison. So what is the Cybersecurity Resilience Bill and why is it being introduced now?
Okay then, so it is an expansion on the current Network and Information Systems regulations, which applies to operators of essential services. So, areas like healthcare and things like that are already have to comply with the NIST regulation. But what the bill does is it actually increases the scope of that and it brings more organisations into the scope. So actually it's starting to bring in data centres, managed service providers and critical suppliers as well that could actually have an impact on those organisations.
Right. So it's not just technology firms, it's public sector
absolutely.
organisations as well, isn't it?
It is definitely. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it with bringing in, for example, critical suppliers, if you think back to 2024 when the NHS pathology labs were seriously impacted by the breach at the Synovus lab, then actually, that's an organisation that is critical to the supply of those services and the impact and the disruption on services is immeasurable. In fact, in that circumstance, I believe they actually contributed potentially to a death as well.
Oh, okay. So let's get into the specifics then. What does the bill actually propose?
So what the bill's doing is it's actually about strengthening the UK's cybersecurity defences because, we're facing an ever-increasing threat.
Yeah.
We've only got to look at the recent, sort of examples that we've had, the massive disruptions, the co-op, couldn't go and get essential provisions.
Yeah, that was devastating.
I mean, we joke about it from our perspective, but you think about it, people with young children and things like that, they're going to need some pretty essential, sort of provisions. Interestingly enough, this bill doesn't really cover food and manufacturing.
Okay.
But it does cover, sort of other essential services. So it covers areas that are already, sort of part of critical national infrastructure. But like I say, it brings into effect the data centres, the managed service providers, the digital infrastructure and the suppliers that support them as well.
Yeah. So it covers things like incident response, doesn't it, and recovery?
Yeah, it does. One of the key factors that this bill is bringing in is actually an incident reporting regime, which is not unlike the one that we have for data protection breaches within the ICO. Yep. So it brings about a requirement for if an organisation suffers a cyber incident, they need to then report it, and they fall within the remit of the bill. Then they'll need to report it within 24 hours.
Right. That's
a kind of like high level report to say who they are, what's happened, and and then within 72 hours they're expected to provide a detailed report, and that report will have to go to one of their regulators.
Right.
So there will be proposed 12 regulators,
and
these are probably organisations that have already doing, providing oversight of those different sectors. So, for energy, it's going to be people like Ofgem. For transport, it's going to be Department for Transport, the Civil Aviation Authority. And then going down to sort of the digital service providers, it will include, Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. It will, include Ofcom, the ICO as well.
Okay, so these regulators will have powers then to enforce the bill?
Yeah, they will. And I think the idea is actually that, the bill will be in place, but actually there will be some sector-specific strategic priorities.
Okay.
So the Secretary for State will set out, the strategic priorities, but actually there's got to be a devolved process around actually making them applicable to each of the different sectors, and then the regulators will have the powers. Then they'll have all sorts of powers, including enforcement. There's also potential around monetary penalties, a little bit like we have for data breaches within the ICO as well.
So do we know what the penalties will be?
Well, the penalties are reported to be sort of similar to the ICO, so that's sort of data breach reporting. So they're reported to be sort of 2% of turnover up to £10 million. But I have seen other reports where they've been more increased. So I think we need to sort of wait and see what the bill brings and get some clarity, because a lot of these things are actually proposals. It's going through its second reading, or it's been through its second reading recently, and it needs to go through Royal Assent. When it goes through Royal Assent, it's going to be a staged approach.
Yeah.
So
I was going to ask about the timescales. Do we have any idea of when this will become legislation?
So it's expected that to become legislation during 2026.
Okay.
But once it becomes legislation, then it's going to be a case of, sort of setting strategic priorities, organisations having to do an assessment of where they are, and then some of the things around incident reporting, around the regulatory, sort of practices and everything else like that will come as a secondary, sort of after that. There's also going to be things like the I've probably got it the wrong way around, but I think it's extortion and ransomware, sort of bill that's also being sort of put in place alongside this, and that's also proposing restrictions on payment of ransomware and things like that. So I think we'll see a lot of these things that come along with secondary legislation to support the bill.
So let's talk a little bit about that secondary proposal. So the ransomware one. So just tell us a little bit about that. So that's split into two, isn't it? Public sector has a specific responsibility and the private sector has a specific responsibility.
Yeah, so this bill is due to go through its next reading at the end of May this year.
Okay.
And, I think they're pretty keen to make sure that this goes through. I mean, the cost of breaches and the cost of incidents is significant to, to the UK economy. And, you've got sort of, I think they said 50% of businesses in 2024 had suffered, sort of a cyber attack. So that's 600,000 organisations. So the whole idea around the ransomware provisions and sort of the around reporting and around sort of payments is actually the proposal is to restrict public sector organisations from paying a ransomware, and also to obviously require the reporting, but also to require all organisations that fit within the specified criteria to report it. And actually the proposal is that the government could actually prevent organisations from paying a ransomware if they think it's linked to sort of some kind of activity that could be harmful to national security, for example.
So I think we have to remember that the motivation behind these pieces of legislation is to harden the organisations, isn't it? It's to help organisations think about preventing these incidents and also putting in process to help them to recover.
Yeah, it is. And I think that, backing this as well has been a government UK cyber action plan, which actually, sort of was revealed on the same day that the cyber resilience bill went for its second reading. And this is actually about, sort of making sure that the UK's got the provisions to support organisations and to help them. So the important thing is actually about prevention. So it's actually about hardening defences and about, having the support in place for organisations in the event of an incident. But like I say, like everything else, prevention is always the most important part.
It is, yeah. And I mean, this isn't necessarily part of this script, Alison, but something just occurred to me. So cyber insurance is an interesting area, isn't it? Because the cyber insurance providers, and I've seen policies where they talk about supporting payments. It's going to be an interesting space when the bill comes in.
It will, but I think they also, sort of the proposal for the bill around, sort of ransomware payments is actually for, sort of organisations that form part of critical national infrastructure and organisations that have got a turnover of over 25 million. So actually, there might be organisations that have got cyber insurance that don't fit within that category. But let's not forget that a lot of cyber incidents are actually data breaches, and there's still that mandatory reporting around the data breach side of things for all of those organisations. I mean, if you look at the things like the time frames, around 72 hours of reporting, it's all aligned to that ICO reporting regulation and the data protection, sort of requirements as well.
So it shouldn't really be any major surprises for organisations, because if you're doing the right thing and you're following current guidance and current requirements, then the move to meet the requirements of the new legislation shouldn't be a huge. Although there will be an impact on there will be an impact on organisations,
of course,
particularly the ones that weren't covered, like data centres, for example, the one originally covered. Let's talk a little bit about those impacts then. So you've got to prepare now. You've got to make sure you've invested, and you are prepared for a cyber incident. There's some reporting requirements, some compliance and reporting requirements. Did you
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think those are going to be sort of like defined by a lot of the regulators, but obviously
Yeah.
a lot of these organisations are already required to do their own submissions annually. So if you look at health, they'll have requirements under, sort of the data security and protection toolkit.
Yeah.
If you look at a lot of the other organisations, they have to comply with NCSC cyber assurance frameworks,
Right.
cyber assessment frameworks, and they have to complete submissions. So actually, if they are going through that improvement process and they're actually compliant with those, then they're going to be, sort of on the right path for, sort of being able to comply. If you think about it from an incident or breach reporting, if you think about incident reporting, actually within most organisations, incident reporting's procedure, there should be a section on reporting to regulators.
Yes.
So actually, it means that you might have to expand, sort of the details of who those regulators are.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is as well is, sort of as this comes into effect, organisations need to go back and look at their business continuity arrangements and their incident response processes as well, because their incident response, so things like a tabletop exercise and having RACI matrix, your RACI matrix is going to have some more regulators in there. It's going to have to. But I think the one thing that's really important in this is actually that recognition of the supply chain and the critical, sort of how critical supply chain is and how it's a potential entry point. How a lot of organisations in the supply chain have got privileged access to people's environment.
Yeah.
It's an easy target for attackers.
It is, and we saw we've seen the supply chain impacts in recent incidents. So there's a lot of accountability now around making sure your supply chain is also secure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it's an interesting area. So, how will this affect everyday people, and how will it affect the UK economy?
So it should actually have a massive improvement. So it's interesting to see that actually under this resilience bill, organisations like Jaguar Land Rover, for example, wouldn't necessarily be, sort of one of those essential providers because they manufacture vehicles. But if you talk about things like ransomware, they may actually have the turnover that makes them fit the criteria to be able to have to report around ransomware and extortion in the future. And actually, where I'm going with that is there was a significant impact on the UK economy as a result of that breach. But if you think about it in day-to-day life, from a day-to-day, all of the UK individuals want to be able to turn on the tap, have clean drinking water, go to the hospital, have their appointments, take place when they expect them to. So they expect to be able to travel by rail, by sort of use their electronic vehicles, because actually the EV charging points are covered by this bill as well. Right. So actually, what it should do is it should actually have less disruption. So, if this bill is enforced and, we're seeing actually UK cyber defence is increased, then we're going to see a lot more, essential services running efficiently and, sort of a lot less impact. And when we talk about things like health, it's not just actually, missed appointments, it actually has a human impact, doesn't it?
Yeah, so there's lots of positive benefits of the legislation.
Yeah.
But obviously there will be an impact on organisations that need to meet the requirements of the legislation because they need to prepare. But you could argue, well, why would you not prepare for a cyber incident? It's something that you need to be doing as part of your IT hygiene, if you like. You need to be doing that anyway. So before we wrap up then, so let's talk about some tips then, what we could provide to the listeners. So how would you prepare? What kind of things can organisations do to prepare or to get ready for the legislation?
Yeah, so there's a lot of good information out there. You go onto the NCSC website, you'll find information. Some of the things that are on there are, sort of, you've got things around, sort of the NCSC cyber assessment framework. So you can go and actually look at, sort of what good looks like, what the expectations are. If you aren't already required to complete an assessment of your, sort of cyber maturity, then actually I'd stress that organisations need to go and do that for the, and they need to be having conversations at board level as well. So let's not forget this is a board level responsibility. A lot of people do hide behind it, but actually if you think about it in terms of any kind of risk, whether it be health and safety risk, whether it be financial risk, the board are notified and the board are aware of that. They need to be similarly aware and actually making informed decisions about cybersecurity risk, and also understanding the responsibilities that they'll have if these regulations actually apply to them.
So in terms of the assessment then, so we're talking about the NIST assessment against the NIST
Yeah,
framework?
we could be against any framework. I mean, you know, a lot of these organisations that will be regulated will probably be required to do something along the lines of the NIST,
Yeah.
not the NIST assessment, sorry, the NCSC assessment, or
okay.
something,
Similar.
or something similar. But again, you know, suppliers, not necessarily. You know, so if you're a supplier, and you know, we start talking about data centres, we start talking about, you know, sort of digital infrastructure providers, then yeah, they need to be, you know, assessing themselves against one of the common cyber assessment frameworks, and you know, sort of. And be prepared really for some scrutiny from the organisations that they're supporting.
Yeah. So just to summarise, then, we're recommending that organisations should really understand where they are in that whole maturity sort of life cycle. You know, where are they in terms of their the processes and technology and people and so on. Technology is interesting because there's a lot of IT vendors, a lot of product vendors out there that will push a lot of technology and say, well, you buy this. And it's been like this for years, hasn't it? You buy this, it'll solve all of your problems. But I think the important part of this is that you need some governance.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think back to it, we can align it to how many organisations or how many suppliers sell a product saying it's GDPR compliant. Well, actually, it's only GDPR compliant if you configure it, set it up and operate it in that way. And that's exactly the same for, you know, cybersecurity defences and technology that helps with that. I think another thing to bring into here as well is we're talking about security and resilience. We're not just talking about, you know, malicious attacks. We're talking about actually potential, you know, incidents, environmental incidents, equipment failure, things that actually could impact on it. So if we look at the things where we had, you know, sort of a fire in a, you know, sort of in a substation that impacted on air travel last year, you know, these are also, you know, sort of areas where organisations need to consider the threats. And it's not just, like I say, malicious threats, it's actually other threats as well, physical, environmental.
So any incident that could potentially disrupt the delivery of the service is covered under this legislation.
Absolutely, and you know, sort of organisations really need to be thinking about that anyway. You know, thinking about your availability and anything that could impact on your availability or the integrity of your information, or going back to the other side of things, the confidentiality as well.
Yeah, and I think we've covered this in one of the other podcasts we did, but it's a simple. There's a couple of questions that the board should be asking themselves. You know, are we resilient? How would we respond if we were faced with a service disruption? And just test that. That's what we started saying, wasn't it? Just test it. You know, run tabletops, run simulated incidents and events. And just get yourself prepared for the real thing, you know. And
I think the important thing as well is if we talk about something like a tabletop exercise, it's important that if an organisation does a tabletop exercise, we know that, you know, sort of IT, for example, are going to be key individuals within that exercise, but they're not the sole people there. And, you know, you need to have senior leads being present, being responsible, you know, making decisions in a tabletop exercise, so that actually, because you'd expect them to be doing that in a real life scenario. One thing I always say is every time something, you know, sort of there's a headline that, you know, everybody sees the headlines about, you know, incidents that are having significant impact. If you're a board member, you should be actually asking people in your organisation, could this happen to us? And okay, then reassure me why this couldn't happen to us.
And are we prepared?
And actually, if it could happen to us, tell me what I need to do to actually prevent that.
Yeah, really good point. And an excellent point to finish on, Alison. And when the legislation does come into force, then please come back and talk to me about the actual legislation. We can talk a little bit more about the detail as we kind of get it confirmed. I think that's brilliant, and thank you for the deep dive into the cyber resilience, cyber security and resilience bill. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.